As a reminder, you can tweet any questions throughout the webinar using hashtag Fpwebinar or the chat window on your GoToWebinar screen in front of you. So we'll get started in just a few more minutes. Real quick, sorry. Okay, good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. My name is Peter Cartier with Fpweb.net, and we're going to get you kicked off with another Fpwebinar here. So, power your business, creating successful SharePoint users. Basically, we're joined today by Jason Schnurr from Protiviti, and we're going to look at some useful ways to eliminate the challenges and pain points that your SharePoint admins are running into when they're trying to get the team on board with harnessing all the great stuff that SharePoint has to offer. So ideally, with a little direction that you're going to get from this webinar, you'll be able to achieve sustainable SharePoint user adoption and squeeze a little bit more value out of that SharePoint investment. So a couple of housekeeping stuff. We are taking a question and answer thing at the end. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, you can use hashtag Fpwebinar on Twitter, or you can use the chat window on the GoToWebinar screen in front of you. When this is all over, we will be sharing this online as we do with all of our webinars, so feel free to check them out on our website. If you see anything else that looks of interest to you, check it out, share it with friends you think it might help as well. And at the end of this, during the question and answer, we are going to give an attendee a copy of the Windows 8 Pro, which will be given to just any lucky attendee at the end. We'll do a random draw. So if I skip down to the what's in this Fpwebinar, here we go. So again, what we're going to look at are the benefits of SharePoint adoption. We're going to look at 3 types of common challenges that you might face, how to achieve that sustainable adoption that we're all looking for, environment-based training methods that Jason's going to go through with you, measuring the outcomes, and sustaining that long-term adoption. So, jumping next to the next screen where you see somebody who is not me. Unfortunately, Jill was under the weather, so she won't be able to join us today. But luckily, we have Jason here. Jason's going to take it away from here and do a great job of explaining how to achieve that sustainable SharePoint adoption. Jason, please take over.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Before I get started, I just want to confirm you can hear me okay, audio.
I know I can.
Yep. Okay. Great. Good. So thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little about SharePoint user adoption. And one of the things that I've experienced over the past 10 years as I've been involved with enterprise software implementations focused both on Microsoft CRM but primarily on Microsoft SharePoint, is that it's difficult for organizations to define the value they expect to achieve from these enterprise software implementations and investments, and even more difficult to achieve and document and demonstrate value from those investments. So that's the focus of the webinar today, is what is a methodology that we can use at our organizations, regardless of the size, to get to defining that value. Because we all know that there is significant investment made in enterprise software applications like SharePoint, not only in the licensing, but also in the professional services that you're paying likely to other organizations, and the cost internally for all of the staff at the organization within the user group to spend the time on the implementation. So there is an unbelievable amount of time and effort spent, generally speaking, to go live with these applications. What, in my experience, I've seen a lack of is investment to take advantage of all of that work. And again, that's the main focus of today. So all of that experience has demonstrated to me that generally organizations apply an extreme way of training people to use SharePoint. And by that I mean generally there is no plan for training, or there is plenty of training, but that training doesn't provide context for business users in being able to take advantage of the benefits of SharePoint. So as we'll see a little later in the presentation, that lack of focus, whether it's lack of training or lack of context, really results in some pretty bleak statistics around user adoption for SharePoint. So before we get to that, though, let's define first why adoption is so important. So as everyone on this call, I would think, agrees with, SharePoint offers significant potential value for organizations, right? The ability to more effectively collaborate across the organization, the ability to share information in real time, the ability for people to work in teams, in groups, and being able to get more done with less, the ability to share information more actively with clients using an extranet, for example. We could go on and on. There are plenty of benefits of using SharePoint. So from a business perspective, really those break down to being able to collaborate effectively, right? Being able to manage information, and then being able to, in a more effective way than we previously had the ability to, collaborate and interact actively with our clients, right? Most organizations these days, and I know Protiviti, we're in 70 different offices across the globe, and it's difficult to get on a conference call effectively if you're working with a colleague in Europe, or even if you're working with a colleague across the country. It is much easier and effective to be able to share information using the technology that we've invested in, as an example. And really, the business benefits of SharePoint are the ones that we focus on mostly, since greater than 95% of all SharePoint users are business staff. And let me just define that. If you take a look at maybe a 100-staff organization, just to make the math easy, there generally aren't going to be more than 8 power users and administrators on the SharePoint deployment. The great majority of people are going to be focused on their day job, right? What do I need to get done? And by the way, what is the benefit in using SharePoint to accomplish my daily goals, right? So again, efficiency and collaboration and sharing and acting on information, all these things are important, but the key to unlocking this value for business staff really lies in crafting and delivering a strategy that makes all of these benefits clear and compelling to business users. And we'll get to some strategies, of course, for doing that. But just in terms of the technology team, of course, there are lots of benefits to the technology team for the organization leveraging SharePoint. What happens most of the time, though, is that the technology team ends up being, the SharePoint help desk once it's live. And in my experience, technology folks need to be enabled to focus on other strategic areas of the business and not answer basic business user questions that should be defined by other groups. So if we can enable the technology team to focus on other strategic areas because we've empowered SharePoint users and decreased the support requirements, then we're providing benefit to the organization overall. And of course, executive benefits. Value of investment, of course, is a pretty general phrase. But what I mean by that is executives need to be involved in achieving adoption within the organization, right? So mostly, not only do executives focus on what the value of the investment is, but to get to any of that value, they've got to be part of defining what value means, which again, in my experience, is not a common practice as it regards the use of SharePoint. So we've defined the benefits. To business users, be more efficient in doing our jobs. To the technology team, focus on other priorities. To the executive team, measuring the return on this really significant investment that's made in SharePoint. Then that leads us to what the challenges are in achieving all of these things. So practically speaking, and this information is taken from a study done by Protiviti, there are 1,100 plus respondents to the survey. And this particular information was really interesting to me when I first saw it, because of those 8 really major priorities you see on the screen there, end user adoption of tools is at the bottom of the list. And overall, that is thought of within this group of over 1,000 IT professionals as a moderate priority. And that's understandable given the other priorities above it. So if we're talking about comparing helping users to be able to effectively leverage SharePoint or securing and protecting the data that the organization has available to it and has built over many years, of course, those data priorities and security priorities are going to take precedence for the information technology team. So really what this points out is that the emphasis on end user adoption is not only undervalued, but also generally misplaced within organizations. And that results then, and this study is from AIM, their market intelligence, the SharePoint puzzle report, but it results in many challenges with organizations enabling their business staff to take advantage of the benefits of SharePoint. So I won't read them to you, but I'd like to just point out the third and fourth one there, totaling resistance from users for whatever reason, but totaling resistance from users, more than 50% of the respondents to the question, what would you say are your biggest ongoing issues with your SharePoint system, said resistance from users was a significant concern, more than 50%. So if we go back and consider all the investment made in SharePoint licensing, strategy around SharePoint, user experience planning, graphic design, enabling search, metadata everything that needs to be done to make SharePoint a useful tool for the organization. And then we report back that over 50% of users resist using it, then that represents a real problem for organizations. And then the last challenge, I promise we'll get away from challenges and get to some solutions here in a minute. But the last area of challenges, and I've already touched on this a bit, is the responsibility across the organization for achieving adoption. And again, in years of experience, what I've seen is that the great majority of the time, that responsibility lies within the information technology team, who, while very capable, many times don't have good enough context for what each business unit wants to achieve in their use of SharePoint, and therefore can't be expected to drive overall adoption of the SharePoint solution. So, the technology team really should have the responsibility on an ongoing basis for supporting adoption by making it as easy as possible to access and gain benefit from SharePoint. So, for example, something that's pretty simple, most organizations have achieved, is Active Directory integration. So when you log into your machine and you put in your password, you can directly open SharePoint like you can directly open Outlook, and you don't have to put in your credentials. That's important. That encourages adoption. Also, one of the biggest areas that technology can affect to encourage adoption is by giving direct integration via the SharePoint intranet to other important applications. So to the ERP system, if it's a professional services organization, obviously putting in time appropriately is really important. Why not have a single sign-on methodology to give everybody access directly to that interface when they visit SharePoint? In that way, making SharePoint, or of course whatever you've named that within your organization, because we're not hopefully calling it SharePoint in the organization, but by making that tool the central hub of all the important information. So not only the ERP system, but also the CRM system. Why not have a direct pass-through, the benefit system, etc. Those are really important elements that the technology team can directly contribute to encouraging adoption. What I would suggest is the main responsibility in terms of helping business users to adopt the solution and to gain value from it and to provide value to clients from using it, that lies on the shoulders of the business team, right? So what those folks should be focused on is really making the solution adoptable. And by that, I mean we're not trying to do everything at once. Again, going back to the first point that was made, either a lack of training or a lack of context. If we try to do everything all at once, it really becomes difficult to provide context for business users, for individuals, on the benefits of using the solution. So one of our clients just recently launched their intranet, and they, like others, had a great strategy in which they did a phased implementation. So the first release was really focused on the human resources elements of the organization. So some things I've already mentioned, giving access to benefits information, giving people the ability to schedule time off within that interface as opposed to printing out a piece of paper. By doing this, making things convenient for users, they started to ingrain within the users the habit of accessing SharePoint for everything that they need to do. And then the next steps were, okay, now how is it that we do more advanced, more sort of impactful outside the organization activities within SharePoint, like creating extranets for managing projects with clients or any number of other benefits. But again, the idea of making the solution adoptable, making it easy, providing context, personalizing as much as possible is really important, and it is the responsibility of the business team and not necessarily the professionals in IT. And then last, in terms of responsibility, one of the reasons this slide is titled Challenges is that many times the executive team, while of course well-intentioned and very interested in providing value to staff and getting value from the investment don't clearly understand what SharePoint is. So this is a Microsoft application, and nobody really ever invested too much in helping staff to learn Word, helping staff to learn Excel, helping staff to learn Outlook. But SharePoint is much more complex to use effectively than those tools that I mentioned previously. So one of the challenges internally is to have an executive advocate, not only for making the investment up front, but over the long term in helping to achieve adoption within that investment over the long term. And even doing things like setting an example by not sending out documents, for example, via email, but posting them to the SharePoint site. Okay, so now we've talked about some of the challenges and also, of course, the benefits. So I think what's missing in general is a methodology to achieve and enjoy the benefits offered by SharePoint. I saw a keynote by a well-known guy in the SharePoint world named Dux Raymond Tsai, and he started it by saying, SharePoint doesn't suck, you suck. And what he meant by that was, we're not spending enough time in creating the strategy for how we benefit from using SharePoint. And it's a lot more than just making it available. Okay, so what are some of the elements of this methodology? And by the way, this methodology is meant to be useful for all sizes of organization, right? So if you have 10 staff, it certainly is going to take a lot less time and effort than it might if you have 10,000. But the idea is to start with generating awareness among the user base on the benefits of SharePoint, as I've mentioned. And that responsibility needs to lie with an executive that's part of the team. Then once that awareness is generated, then we don't go right to providing training. The important thing is understanding what the capability of staff is in using SharePoint. So that capability assessment is really focused on, regardless of specific role or what department an individual is in, if we expect that individual to take advantage of the benefits of SharePoint that we've spent so much time and effort to make available, then let's make sure that we have context for their vision, for their understanding of what's going on. So that capability assessment can be done by a simple survey. So it's simple for the users to complete it. It takes a little bit of time and effort to put the right information in so that we can get the right results, so that we can then establish the learning objectives. So we compare the goals laid out by the team, by the executive team for using SharePoint. We assess what our colleagues, the business users, can do now, and then based on the goals, where we want to be, and where we are now, we establish the objectives for learning. And so, in my opinion, then and only then can you get to how are we providing training? What are we training on? What type of training is going to be available for the staff? And of course, training is not just, the traditional sit in a classroom and consume information for 6 or 8 hours. In fact, I would contend that that is one of the worst ways to provide training around SharePoint. So you see there on the screen we mentioned both curriculum and environment-based training. I think it's important to point out the differences and why those are separated. So there is, Protiviti has, and many other organizations have created specific curriculum around base SharePoint to enable business users, to enable security professionals, business intelligence professionals, technology professionals on architecture, et cetera, in any number of areas, right? And where that curriculum-based training is helpful in these types of scenarios where we're just focusing on how you and your colleagues can better use it, is during the implementation. If we have a staff that generally just doesn't understand SharePoint or collaborative tools in general, it may very well be a great idea to provide lunch and learn sessions or brief sessions that focus on document management, collaboration, search, lists, libraries, just to give everybody context for what this solution can do. Then, in a perfect world, as we're doing this while we're implementing it, right, when we're closer to go live and we have a development environment we can use for environment-based training, then we take that general SharePoint instruction and we provide context to it. So no longer is it just that you can create a document library, but it is that you can create a document library for this purpose within our organization, and the use of that library will provide the benefit, right? So this is all a progression from the general, what do you know how to do, and let's give you some general information, to the very specific. What is it that you as an individual or as a team, as a group, need to accomplish? And let's provide that context. And of course, let's make this environment-based training sync with the governance plan that we've developed either as part of the ongoing implementation or that we have developed as part of the implementation that's already completed. That's really important. Why spend time in governance if you're not leveraging that work as you're doing the training? And then, of course, the one thing I want to make sure that I point out is all of this work is able to be defined, right? It can be objective, right? One of the ways that we've found great success in measuring the outcomes of these efforts is just to use a simple SharePoint list. So going back to the example of a 100-staff organization, if we have right now 50, say, novice SharePoint users and 48 what we would consider to be business users, can do the important basics, and then a couple power users, maybe we set our goals back as we're defining the objectives to take those 50 novices up to the business user level, and at the end of the effort have 90 business users and 10 power users, because that ratio makes sense. All of that can be tracked from the beginning within SharePoint using a simple list, right? All that we need to do is track the people and the category, and then we can report on that and actually show the outcomes, at one point in time, and continue to use that information as we sustain that adoption over the long term. So the last thing that I'll point out, and that is really important for everyone to keep in mind, is this isn't just a point-in-time effort, right? We're going to have new staff. We're going to have staff that maybe have understood a certain aspect of SharePoint that's important, but maybe don't use it very often, so they need to go back and refer to something. So in terms of sustaining adoption, there are all kinds of options for doing so. But how about sort of short videos that give people an idea of what a certain area can do for them? Then longer form webinars that are recorded, available on the intranet for people to go and review at their convenience. Quick reference guides so that individuals who prefer to kind of learn by reading and not viewing can get information on a particular area. So the point of this is that there needs to be a varied method of sustaining that adoption once it's achieved, so that over the long term, the organization can look at SharePoint and define the value that it's received from the significant investment that it's made. So with that, I'll stop and be happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Jason. That's great. I think that's going to really help some organizations. As far as I can see so far, it looks like you explained it so well that, oh, wait, here's one question. Okay, Robin's asking, our functional teams use folders to manage content. Our technical teams are in the process of migrating to SharePoint 2013. We'd like to encourage the users to move from folders to metadata, but it will not be realistic for us to do so before the migration. So what should the IT team do to architect the 2013 environment to support a move to metadata at a later date?
Okay, so great question. Thank you. I hope that I completely understand it. If I may summarize, we're not ready to tell the business users exactly how to leverage metadata tagging so that they no longer have to use folders and they can actually leverage search in SharePoint. How do we create a strategy and the ability to do that? That's kind of what I heard. So, obviously that is the right outlook, right? How are we planning for the future to get out of the habit of using folders, which of course I won't explain them. Everybody understands the challenges of information that's just on one individual's desktop. I think that the best strategy there is to not wait to educate the users. I mean, it depends on your particular time frame, but as I mentioned, there is the opportunity that even before the solution that you're creating, the 2013 deployment, is ready for use by the business staff, we can start to educate business staff on really what metadata means, why it's important to categorize and track data about the data that's in SharePoint. And then, most importantly, as I've talked with folks about metadata and, why that's important, I always go to, do you use Google and do you use Bing? Are you impressed by the results you get based on what you type in? Well, that's as a result of the formulas that these companies have created that are based on metadata, right? So you don't get good search results without tying correct metadata to your information. And that might be good context to provide to the business users so that they can understand, oh, okay, in my personal life, I take advantage of these things that we're now building so that we can take advantage of it that way at our jobs. And that's a benefit to me because I'm used to doing those things.
Okay, great. I'm going to do the winner real quick because we have a couple more questions to get to, but just to get it in the half-an-hour mark, let's see. We've got Matt Schuessler is the winner. Hey, I know Matt. Congrats, buddy. We'll get you a Windows 8 Pro. We'll send that your way. And in the meantime, Stan Tracy, another MVP of our webinars, is asking, am I going to be able to grab unstructured data in the near future? Did you get that question, Jason?
Yeah, I think I might need a little bit more context for the question.
Yeah, Stan, if you can message us just a little more context, and we'll move on to Jose's in the meantime, which is, in creating a brand new project-driven portal, what are some creative gadgets to use that will make the portal attractive to the user? I'm trying to stay away from the traditional setup. Your thoughts are appreciated.
Yeah, great. So that's a great question. I think that one of the things, and I hope this hits the question that you're asking, I think you're getting to, let's get people excited about getting there and accomplishing it without saying, hey, it's a SharePoint collaboration site and here are the things that you can do with it. Well, that many times gets to branding. So again, as I mentioned before in the previous answer, I always think of these things as the business staff are consumers. So if we think of each individual as a consumer in the consumer world, and think about ways that organizations who cater to consumers market to them, it's all about personalization and it's all about ease of use. So a real quick example, one of our clients, the Ocean Conservancy, first launched an intranet using SharePoint. It wasn't as successful as they'd liked. And when we went back and looked at it, one of the reasons was they branded it their SharePoint intranet. And so as we worked together with them, they did a complete rebrand to make it easier to use, to make it more visually appealing. And as the Ocean Conservancy, they actually branded it their Fintranet. So giving context to users, and so as opposed to showing the standard SharePoint screens, they branded it with, blue and green, which was their corporate colors. They called it Fintranet. They made it look like other elements that the organization makes available to internal staff. And so, therefore, they saw a great uptick in people's use and appreciation of the tool.
Excellent. Stan, I think, has left, so we'll have to take that question offline, hopefully help him out with that one. But in the meantime, I don't see any other questions. Not a problem if any of you come up with a question later on. You can always tweet it to us or email, whatever you like. Again, this webinar is going to be made available to each of you, and it'll be online on our website at Fpweb.net. So thank you again, Jason. Big thank you to step up and give this great presentation. I think this is really helpful. Thanks to everybody else for attending, and we definitely hope to see you next time. You have anything to say at the end, Jason?
I don't. Thank you. I hope everyone has a great day.
All right. Have a good day, guys.